I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So a reminder that this meeting, like all meetings of the Attleboro School Committee, is being electronically recorded. Let's start with our consent agenda. I have a motion to accept a donation in the amount of $847.26 from La Parade Studio to the gifts donation line of the Thatcher Early Learning Center.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
A motion to accept a donation in the amount of $4,000 from the Feinstein Foundation with allocations divided pursuant to the school committee memo dated January 21st, 2016.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept a donation of 2 cases of paper, 1 case to Willett Elementary School and 1 case to Hill Roberts.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. At this point, we'll move on to our business agenda, and we'll call up our professionals to handle the annual report. We have Superintendent Sheehan, Laura Regan, our K-8 ELA coordinator, Jean Dyer, our data and accountability coordinator, Marie, principal at Attleboro High School, Andy Bowles, principal at Quillo, and Joanne DePalma, principal of Studley Elementary School. So, take it away.
Good evening, members of the school committee and the community at large. My pleasure to be a part of introducing you to the 2014-15 school year annual report. If you look at, I know that you've all received a copy of that 50-plus page document. It is very thorough. I want to congratulate all the people who helped put this document together. But first and foremost, I'd like to thank all of our parents, our students, our teachers and administrators for a great 2014-15 school year. There are other things that I think the public at large should know, and people who work in our buildings every single day, that these achievements in the course of any single school year do not happen because we will them. That people need to realize that we have 4 members of the school committee that they just don't meet on a Monday evening, such as we do right now with the 9 members and the superintendent and other administrators. That the school committee also meets every single month in specific committees. And those committees are the Policy and Personnel Committee, the Teaching and Learning, the Infrastructure and Facilities, and the Finance and Budget Committees. All of the work that takes place behind the scene is probably 10 times that in order to produce something meaningful within our schools. And a lot of times you don't get recognition by which to devote your time away from your families in order to help move the school system forward, and I congratulate you on that. I think that the annual report is appropriately subtitled, and sometimes we miss that, and that is Transforming Conviction into Results. I think the previous school committee and the present school committee have ownership of that conviction, as well as the administration and teachers and our students. Not everything can be placed into an annual report. You can't place every single day in it. But we also need to know that other things took place and they are significant, such as the Attleboro Public Schools safety and emergency response procedures and protocols, which are commonly called Be Safe, that we've been working on for 2 years and is fully implemented as of toward the end of last year and this year. Also, I believe that the school committee and the administration and teachers have worked exceptionally hard to create a school culture that is student-centered and one that is collaborative in nature with shared decision-making and an emphasis on transparency and communication and the building blocks of trust and respect. And because of those features and those characteristics that we're trying to instill, we now have an excellent understanding about what is taking place in the past, where we are currently in the future, and as you will see in the annual report, that this outlines a very effective blueprint for success in the future. So at this time, I'll hand it over to Jean Dyer, the principal orchestrator and architect with Laurie Regan for the annual report.
Thank you.
Jean?
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. I'd like to begin by drawing your attention to the cover photo on the annual report, because of what I wanted to engage in during the creation of this report. It's a young boy who engages us because he so clearly wants us to share the pride that he feels in his very personal creation. And I chose that cover because we all want our children, all children, to know what this pride feels like. Personalization is at the heart of this report, and you will see many examples throughout where the focus is on the student behind all the numbers. So I don't want to lose that. Also, over the course of this year so far, there have been major presentations on several topics that this summarizes. For example, in November, there was an in-depth report on MCAS. That was, I believe, a 35-minute report. I can't be doing that entire report again. There was also a report by the high school that went in depth on SAT results and AP and graduation. And I will touch on those lightly. But the idea here is to be respectful of your time and to do the best job I can in clarifying any issues that I raise during the presentation of the report. A little background is important. The last annual report presented to the school committee was 12-13. And of course, one might ask, what happened to 13-14? The predecessor in my position vacated that position, and it was left vacant until mid-January of last year. And complicating the issue, we know also that the Department of Education does not release results in the past traditionally until the fall. This year, it was December before we had some of the data, and actually just this weekend they released some other significant data. So there are challenges in syncing reports to a prior year. And then additionally, we've had to change internally the order of presentations that are made by the various individual schools. The school improvement plans have now been moved up to be in keeping. And then a final challenge that we had was to incorporate the strategic plan Envisioning 2020, which was being created concurrent with the groundwork that was being laid for bridging to 2020 in the year 14-15. So lots of challenges. The goal let me put this there so you can see that. I think there's a delay. I remember having I am pushing back. You can see, I remember having this problem once before. I think I have a light touch.
That's good if you're golfing, by the way. It's nice.
All right. All right. So the goals for the report are to model in this particular report the emphasis on the student behind the numbers. Also, it's important to show the connection, the nexus of the strategic plan that was developed in 14-15 that was concurrent with this groundwork, and then to take advantage of visual possibilities, because this will be a web resident report, and there is a good deal in student pictures and activities and events that they're engaged in that is best presented in that manner. So an overview of the structure so that you can follow the big pillar pieces of the report. Mrs. Regan and I are going to present the first probably 2/3 of the report, and then Mr. Rooney, Mr. Bowles, and Mrs. De Palma will talk to the various levels, the secondary, middle school, and the elementary school, summarizing key areas that help to clarify what has been going on at specific schools. So the report begins with, I'm going to go an abbreviated overview of the schools and their mission. We see ourselves as a community of stakeholders that we would like to have an entire community participating in the collective success of our young people. A place where we engage and challenge and inspire our students to maximize their potential. A place where goals will lead us to maximizing their potential, and they're aimed at personalizing planning, improving quality and relevance, and increasing community engagement. Now, the next slide is the one that begins the profile section of the annual report. It looks a bit busy, but let me help you with this following along. On the left side is the cost of, per pupil cost of education. And running across the bottom are scores that show increasingly high achievement from left to right. It is taken from a CAP analysis which looked at charter school caps. So that's the source, and it is the data is available online. The dots represent schools that are similar to us in their size and in the levels of the school attainment, and also not just the population but the demographics of those schools. And they're a cohort. They call them DART districts, but they're our cohort. And if you look carefully, you will see that on the achievement level with regard to our cohort, we're the higher achieving of the set of 11. And if you look on the left from top to bottom, you will see that we are one of the least expensive in terms of per pupil expenditure of those communities. And therefore, you would conclude that the cost-benefit analysis of where we stand is extremely favorable in terms of what it is that is delivered for achievement in terms of per pupil cost. It is an eye-opener, especially when you see some of the per pupil costs that are there. The term lowest 10% is relative to a border that, or a line that the state draws with regard to those schools that would have charter schools. If you fell below a 10%, then the cap on charter school was up for discussion. And you'll notice we're not anywhere near that.
I think we had
Oh,
question.
there was a question,
Yeah,
sorry.
Mr. Geddes?
Thank you, sir. Not so much a question, but just a point of clarification. Numbers-wise, looks like among the DART schools for expenditures per student, correct me if I'm wrong, we're second lowest to Methuen, correct?
At that time, yes.
In
The DART,
24 for
our
2014.
DART group may change from year to year because if their demographics don't usually change, but the level assignment of their schools, et cetera, those things can change.
Right. So second lowest of, and granted Cambridge is
Yeah.
clearly an outlier on so many levels.
Right.
Um,
And it wasn't in this year's DART.
okay.
Yep.
I think it's important to point out, and I know this was an important message, a critical message that the previous committee tried to impose on the community. But it's important to praise you guys for what you're doing with less. But it's also important to emphasize that we need more. That this is, as thrilled as we should be, I think we also need to keep an eye on what the possibilities would be if we were properly funded, if we had proper staffing. I know in his inaugural address, the mayor mentioned that we are spending more than 2 out of the 4 neighboring communities. I'm assuming those 4 were Seekonk, Mansfield, Norton, and North Attleboro. All of those would, except for Seekonk in 2014, all of those would also be below everyone except Methuen. And all of those are still well below the state average from 2014, which is a little over $14,005 per student, whereas Attleboro sits at $12,777. So I think as great as it is to say that, the Red Sox had a better record than the White Sox last year, that doesn't mean the Red Sox were a good team last year. So I think we need to keep that in perspective and really continue to bring the point home about how important it's going to be to invest in our schools for the next few years.
Thank you.
Thank you for that additional research. That was helpful.
Mr. Storrs?
Yeah, just to go off of what Mr. Getty said. So we're the second lowest per pupil expense, and we are more than double many of our, and we didn't come up with these, this is the Department of Elementary Secondary Education, said that these are our comparable districts. We're more than double as far as ranking in the state compared to these other ones. Now, I think it's important to note, okay, we're around 12,000, and there's many of these that are 13, 14, 16, or so on. A $1,000 difference per student when you have 6,000 students, $6 million.
Great point.
And I think that's important to note, because many of these, 13,000, 18,000, 13,960, I think that just shows how important that $1,000 per student means a lot.
Mr. Quinn, then Mr. Geddes.
I appreciate the research that you did, Mr. Geddes. And one of the questions that's just kind of floating in the back of my mind, I know you don't have this information, but I'm wondering what percentage over net school spending these districts are also adding on to that base as well. I believe that those surrounding districts were anywhere from 2 to 4, but they were definitely above net school spending. So I think it's not just what you're spending, but it's what the state also tells you based on your student needs that you're spending. So you're trying to get it. I think most districts have figured out, and I don't have the numbers offhand, but that the minimum is just not enough. And I'd be curious to see, if we're even getting even more bang for our buck relative to what our needs are. So.
That's an interesting line of investigation. I'd like to see that myself. So thank you for that.
And then what Mr. Storrs just mentioned, that $6 million, I know there's a thought that we as a committee, both the previous committee and I don't mean to speak for everyone here, but I'm sure this committee will also, it'll seem like we're asking for the world when it comes to budget time with how much we're asking from the city, because it's so much more than what we're receiving now. But I don't think it's any coincidence that $6 million would literally close the gap almost to the T of what we're spending now, or what we're receiving now, and what we are asking for. So that $1,000 is per person would be critical.
Thank you.
I think one of the most operative pieces with regard to this is the ability for all of us to compare oranges to oranges and not oranges to apples, and that's why the Department of Education, in fact, compares us to like communities. The second piece is that we can't lose sight of how long will the Attleboro Public School System be able to sustain the type of growth and student achievement without additional resources and what we commonly call investment. What is the increased investment that's going to be necessary for us to continue this particular type of growth, or what our students should be entitled to?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've said in the past, I think this is an extremely valuable slide. I think it sheds light on why the school committee asked for, and the administration asked for what they asked for each year. It puts that in perspective, and it also it shows how the job that our teachers, administrators do on a daily basis, and what they're able to accomplish and how valuable they are. So, thank you.
So moving along, the next section of the report deals with profile highlights. There are 40 charts in the report, so I won't belabor each and every one of them, but I will touch on some key things I would like people to keep in mind. One is that our ELA MCAS scores have gone over a 6-year period from a CPI of 77% to 92%. So that's definitely a history of steady growth. I do want to point out that I chose to take a longitudinal view over time on the MCAS because this past year MCAS was only given to grade 10 and then in ELA and math, and grades 5 and 8 in science. So getting the sense of where we are over time was the challenge, and I thought that was the manner in which we presented it would be the best view of the data. Also, also in mathematics, the scores showed overall gain, but not as rapid a rise as in ELA, but please note 57% of the math students in the high school were in the advanced category, and that is really quite significant. Science and technology and engineering have made gains, and they are now close to the state. It's been sort of a coming from behind story with regard to science and technology, and that is because they've had to take a back seat to ELA and math in terms of where priorities have gone. And now with initiatives for STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and math, and with hope, increased funding for things like coordinator. There is no coordinator of the science program. The science program until this year had the difficulty of the standards had not been agreed upon because they were being completely overhauled at the state level, and so now that is in place. And obviously in terms of materials that people need for hands-on experiences, those are challenges. The next 5 charts or so that are in the annual report on pages 12 and 13 deal with subgroup performance. And I just wanted to point out that our special needs population has remained relatively constant. However, our English language learner population had a steeper increase over time than did the state in terms of population. But in terms of achievement, you will see that both the ELL population and the special needs population over the past 6 years has consistently had higher CPI scores than the state, which is really admirable. Is there a question there?
Yeah, just a quick question, and this kind of goes to all of the assessment data. Are you collecting aside from grades, other forms of data? I mean, this is just one data point. It's one test over a series of days. We know, we've talked about UDL in terms of different formatting can give us a different indication. Particularly with the students with special needs, are we collecting data in terms of portfolios that can also show growth or show proficiency in other ways?
Yes, is the short answer.
Okay.
But in terms of longer answer, there's great variety in terms of the types of data that we are collecting on special needs students. Obviously, areas that deal with the affective domain and behaviors are every bit as important as many of the academic measures that are in place. And meeting the goals of the IEP and the data that supports that the goals of an IEP are or are not being met, those are other pieces of data. And of course we have our district common assessments and other types of data. There's quite an extensive list of the types of assessments that are being done in the district contained in the DDAT or the district data report. That goes on for pages, actually.
Sure.
But thank you for that question because it's enlightening for others.
I think we have one more, Mr. Storrs.
Yeah, when it comes to the different subgroups, I always like looking at the data and doing comparison over years. And what I found difficult, and I'm sure as the data analysis person you did as well, is that we only have grade 10 this year.
Right.
Because of the park test. So we only have the grade 10, and looking at grade 10, it looks pretty comparable to the state, so that's great, but the real concern is not having that data, and that gives us a big hole of what we use to help us, guide the district in where we can focus to make improvements. I'm assuming I'm going to be asked to do park again, and in that way, do we have any guidance or any idea from the state when we're actually going to get to the point where we're going to get usable park data to help us?
We're actually touching on that more in depth in the park report. I will say, obviously, it has been a challenge to have to, the 46% of the state took MCAS, and the remainder took park. And the challenge of this report is how to meld those together. They're not apples and apples. And so you're putting them in a side-by-side chart without any preface, which is what will be necessary in the park presentation, does obviously present anyone watching with some challenges. So I hope to greater clarify that a little bit down the road. But yes, we are in transition. This is the park is a work in progress, and only when we get to the point where the entire state is taking the same test do we have the kind of data that you'd like to see again. I did want to just briefly point out something that may have been confusing to anyone that is accustomed to looking at graduation rates, and that is that there are two kinds of reports, two methods of looking at graduation data that the state uses. One is called an annual report, and that looks at the change in our enrollment from the beginning of a year to the end of that school year, and who isn't there any longer, basically. So it's a change. And this year, the dropout rate was 1.1% for 14-15. The other report that they give when talking about graduation and dropout is called the cohort report. And it looks at a group of ninth graders and how many of those ninth graders are still here after 4 years. Did they stay with their cohort? Any community that has a transient population, or that has, as we do, 92 McKinney-Vento students, is challenged in keeping a particular cohort together over time. So the most recent publication of graduation and dropout rates dealt with cohort groups, but the presentation that you had from the high school dealt with the annual, because they were asked, how did you do last year? And they presented that data appropriately. So I did want to point out the two methods. They have different calculations, but they're different perspectives, different ways to look at the data. And I think that's going to sum up where we are. I did want to point out on AP just one little thing, and that was that there were 3 AP exams that have higher populations of students taking them. Some have just a few, but others have higher populations. The history and social science, calculus, and physics. And appropriately, they cover a wide span of disciplines in the school. And in those, you can see that the AP scores of 3 to 5 were higher than that of the state. And I know that the high school presented other data previously that showed the contrast and how close to global scores, we all were. Massachusetts sets a very high standard. All right, at this point in the program, if there's no objection, I would like to begin the next phase of the presentation. And that deals with district-wide initiatives and undertakings in the last year that set the scene, laid the groundwork for the Envisioning 2020 plans that we have. And Mrs. Regan is going to begin with one of 4 pillars that we'll discuss and what took place last year with regard to those.
So one of the major pieces that we are starting to put into place is the Aspen Instructional Management System, or IMS. And it's a curriculum mapping tool where all of our curriculum units can be housed and teachers can modify them. They can write lesson plans specific to them. And it is digital so that it can be accessed at any point in time. The major personalization piece of this is that it's actually a living system of curriculum documents, so it can change depending on the students that you have in front of you and depending upon what the teacher sees that the students' needs are. Another piece of the IMS is Quest, which is an educational search engine, and all of the information that's on that search engine can just be basically clicked on and then dragged into your planner to be used at any point in time within that module. We have provided professional development this year for all of our teachers at all levels, and they're starting to use pieces of it, but we still need to provide some professional development for that in that planning.
When do you think that the IMS will be up and fully running, fully utilized?
Currently, right now, we have our English language arts units in it, we have our mathematics units in it, and we're working on putting other content areas in as well.
Okay. Mr. Quinn?
Is that accessible to like a families looking to come into Attleboro? Will they have access to Aspen? Because I know Atlas, King Philip, just for example, it's public. Is that kind of the plan, or is it to keep it in-house? What's the thought long-term with Aspen?
I know there is a parent portal
Okay.
and it provides information. I'm not
Okay.
sure about the actual curriculum documents, but it's definitely something that we can look into. Another piece that supports personalization is the MTSS grant, and I'll get into that more on the next slide. UDO is a reading research or reading support tool that we have which is supported by a company called CAST, and it embeds universal design for learning principles in it to engage students in what they're reading and then provide them with different ways to demonstrate they comprehend what they've read. We've also embarked on learning about universal design for learning. 2 of our schools, actually 3 of our schools currently are in different processes of rolling out and implementing universal design for learning, and I'll get more into that on the next slide. And also our district curriculum accommodation plan was completed this year. That provides numerous supports for our general education students, including instructional, organizational, behavioral, medical, and physical supports that teachers can use as a guide in the classroom on a daily basis.
And that, the district accommodation plan resides on the web in the education section. And so it's available to all teachers. I believe it's an over 20-page document with suggestions for accommodations. Whoops, went a little far. There we go.
So the Massachusetts Tiered Systems of Supports grant, or the MTSS grant, is based upon implementation science. And a group of us on the district implementation team are currently learning about the best ways to implement initiatives in the district. And thinking about it on moving at a much slower pace, and in the way that we train teachers, the way that we communicate with teachers, and the way that we communicate with everyone also is included in that implementation science. One of the initiatives that is a part of that is Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, or PBIS. And within PBIS, our teachers are currently learning about positive ways that we can systematically affect behaviors, unwanted behaviors that we're currently seeing in the schools. We're currently, cohort 1 is Attleboro High School, Brennan Middle School, Thatcher and the Early Learning Center, and Studley Elementary School. Cohort 2 currently is Hyman Fine and Willett. And they're all in different phases of implementation right now based upon their school's needs and where they are. Universal Design for Learning is again supported by CAST, and we're currently in, again, different phases of implementation at Wamsutta, Hill Roberts, and Coelho. We're learning about the different principles that are embedded within Universal Design for Learning, so multiple means of engagement. How can we get our students to engage in the content and in the lessons that we're teaching them? Multiple means of representation. What are the different ways that we can show the information to our students, whether it be a video to engage them, online, we can look at different pieces, we can have audio of a text that's being read. Multiple means of action and expression allows for us to really look at the goal of the lesson to see, is our goal really to write a 5-paragraph essay, or is our goal to have them understand about a particular content area? And so we're looking critically at that and see if there's different ways that we can have students represent what they've learned. And finally, this year, we're embarking on the learning about literacy action. We have a literacy action team, and it is supported by the Hill for Literacy. And the elementary team is working on that. We have representatives from each grade level and 2 administrators on the team. We have met twice so far this year, and the literacy action plan is underway. And we're getting feedback on that right now from all of the different members that are currently on the team.
Thank you, Lori. The second pillar that we'd like to discuss is fostering the culture that is needed for the 21st century. This is the information age. In order to succeed, our students need skills, new skills, because the jobs are new. There are jobs that never existed before that are now part of our economy. They need to think deeply about issues, to be able to problem solve creatively, to be able to communicate in many different types of media. They need to be comfortable with technology. They need to work in teams. These are all part of the 21st century. I'm going to humor myself by taking you back to my early days of teaching. This is so incredibly different from the day when you would walk into your classroom, close the door, talk to no one through the day.
Why are you looking at me about this? I had to take my log with me to elementary school for the fireplace.
That's funny, but and we, in terms of data sharing, it was only the mid-year Saturday with your calculator that you actually saw it all together. We worked hard. I don't want to take that away from any teacher who began when I did. But today's teacher is engaged in professional learning communities on many fronts. They are inundated with information that they must analyze. They have all kinds of new technology that they need to master in order to model and have their students work with the new technology. Mrs. Regan's already touched on implementation science, but I do want to point out a necessary piece. In the past, if there was some new program that came down the pike that was to be rolled out, it might not have been possible to know in advance what bottlenecks there might have been, what impediments there might be to the implementation of such a plan. And then when the next program came down, you started all over again with your rollout and the issues. Wouldn't it be far better if people understood all of those issues that are in a transferable way, so that the way one goes about any type of implementation follows a pattern, and decision-making tools need to be put in place, and people need to be evaluating along the way. And that is another aspect of teaching that is important and makes it possible when rafts of new programs are coming down quickly because of all of the changes in the 21st century. You have to have mechanisms and transferable skills that allow for those implementations.
I'd just like to add one piece. I honestly wish I had created this term, coined this term, or this statement. I have to give credit to Terry Gayton, who was an employee here for the Career and Tech Center. And I think he sums up, if we think that education is the same now as it was 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago, we are teaching students skills for jobs that have not been created yet.
Right.
Thank you.
Very interesting, that comment. I wish I had said it first, but I didn't.
I'm now going to just let Mrs. Regan talk a bit about PBIS, because she mentioned it with regard to the MTSS grant, but now some examples.
It definitely supports culture within each of the buildings where we're implementing it. There are the PLCs in place, and teachers are working together, coming up with all of the pieces that need to be in place in order to successfully roll out PBIS. And I'm sure Mr. Palmer will be speaking about that as well as Mr. Rooney. But at Studley, the motto is Studley Stars. They have Studley Stars, and that's a team initiative. There's Panda Pride at Thatcher, and we are respectful, responsible, and we're ready to learn. At Brennan, we are respectful, we make responsible choices, and we stay focused on learning, BMS. And at AHS, we have the Pride 5, so we are personal responsibility is developed every day. But it definitely brings with it a certain culture that I think it's important to note on this slide as well.
Staying on the culture theme, the Leadership Advisory Board was created last year. There is an org chart in the annual report that explains how it is set up. The point of the Leadership Advisory Board is shared decision-making that involves the community and teachers in various councils that grapple with problem solving. So depending on which council, the problems are bigger than one person always, and the challenge is with the Leadership Advisory Board to oversee many of the councils and the work that they do. So a lot more modeling for students. If students are going to work in a world in which they work in teams, shouldn't they, ought to be accustomed to seeing the adults that they work with every day working in teams as well. And then Lori has touched on, and I have heard mentioned several times this evening in various places, reference to professional learning communities. The key here is that they are proliferating. So we have data teams for ELA and data teams for math, and we'll be creating more for special needs teachers working together. And data teams are not the only ways that people sit together and look at information. They're communities with different charges, making decisions based on data. So at that point, yes.
Some people may be asking, what was the creation of LAB or the Leadership Advisory Board, and how did it come about? It just didn't come about out of thin air.
No.
So I think we need to give credit where credit is due. Under the previous superintendent, Dr. Pia Durkin, the Attleboro Public Schools received a $500,000 Race to the Top grant called the HRPP grant, the Human Resource Pilot Program, in that grant. And that was a 4-year grant, and many administrators and many teachers in the school district participated in 4 years, and two other school districts were a part of this. That was Brockton and Revere, and some people here, in fact, were part of that group. And for 4 years and many, many, many hours, we participated in this particular grant. The reality was, one of the direct outcomes of that grant was, in fact, the Leadership Advisory Board. So I felt that maybe you should know before it disappears too long. Things build and things get progressed from one year to another. It just doesn't happen in a single year. Someone creates it. these things were long in coming and tries to make the school system better. And that, in fact, was a universal piece where teachers and administrators said, this culture needs to be changed to a student-centered culture with shared decision-making and collaborative thinking. So I just wanted to share that with the community and with the community, with the school committee at large.
I'm very grateful that you added that in, and that would have been a terrific missed piece if you hadn't brought the history of.
That's why they pay me the big bucks.
If you hadn't brought that in, it's a big piece. Okay, so the next pillar is that of engagement. There are so many partnerships that exist in the district that it isn't possible to name them all. You're familiar with many of them, and this slide presents some of them. But the key that I wanted to talk about with regard to 14-15 isn't that these are new, except for the Tozier Cassidy concession stand. It is that there are more and more of them, and that the ways in which we are reaching out to the community in terms of Twitter sites and Facebook pages and teacher-developed websites. These were all a big portion of work that was ongoing last year. So there are more activities in the schools, and when you hear the presentations from them, they may touch on them. And there is greater communication. There are email blasts that now go out to parents much more regularly than in our early days. If there were a count of teacher, parent, or guardian emails that are going back and forth, that also is a big uptick in the number of communications that are ongoing.
I think we have a question. Mr. Quinn?
Do we have a sense, and do we have a process for understanding how the message is reaching, if the message is reaching, in terms of, we send these blasts out, we send these Facebook, we send these tweets out. Are we keeping, is there any sort of process in place, or are we starting to think about a process for, are we reaching our intended audience? Is it leading to increased engagement, and then kind of coming up with a plan for almost personalized follow-up? Because we might have a group that comes in 1 year, 3 years go by, and do we always know who we've worked with in the past and how we might be able to follow up? And has there been I guess, to a database that we could maybe build, or does it exist already?
The database doesn't exist, but I can tell you that in the school improvement plans that principals devised, they were, I would see things like surveys to see how effective that particular process was, number counts for various activities in order to compare the number of parents, say, showing up for a particular activity with prior years, engagement in the PTOs, and sort of number-driven data that principals are now collecting. It would be the next step to have district-wide communication data results, and I'm interested in
Because I think that for next year, what would be helpful is just to kind of see the progress. This is kind of the partnerships that we had. And I know principals' plates, they're full as it is, and not to, if we can find a way to distribute this or find somebody who's interested in collecting that kind of data or has that expertise, I think it would be helpful, particularly within our strategic plan where we're trying to get that community engagement.
Thank you. Did you have your hand up?
I think one of the pieces that many of us do know and have served on those committees, that if you look at the Envisioning 2020 or the district strategic plan, there is a position there. And I think that piece will in fact be achieved when, if we get the necessary resources, as other communities who have a higher per pupil expenditure, if we get those resources, if we make those investments, and we have a director of engagement or public engagement, I think that's the piece that we get that data, we get that reach out, we get those connections, and that enhances our community. So I think that is entwined right now in the district strategic plan as we move forward.
Ms. Regan?
Thank you. I was going to explain that.
I'm
It is
sorry.
it's currently in
Laurie
the
just
strategic
said that.
plan.
Great minds.
Thank you.
Well,
Mr. Bowles?
I think one of the things to add to what you're saying, Mr. Quinn, is the use of Aspen in our schools. And I think, getting feedback from the community is vital to the success of the community engagement. I think one of the greatest aspects of feedback that we're getting back from parents is their use in their availability to using the parent portal and opening that up to parents. We're seeing from our middle school level less parents calling, asking about what are the homeworks for the night, what are the missing assignments, because it's readily available. The portal being open so we do not have to print progress reports come mid-semester, it's readily available, and the idea that report cards will be in that same avenue, and then you can email and teachers can give feedback to grades that were given, and it's all instantaneous for the parents to have. We've averaged it's definitely swung in the positive. We actually have parents calling now and said, I created this, indicator on my Aspen portal that if my child gets below a 70, I'd be alerted. And they're emailing the parent right away. That's the kind of communication that we find is a vital piece to the student success. So the students know that essentially the parents or the home is in constant communication with the school. So the child sort of can't get through the loops or say, well, I forgot to bring home my test to get signed. The parents know instantaneously, which is a great aspect of it.
Principal Rooney?
Just one very simple piece of data in terms of Aspen. In November of 2012, the high school launched we launched Blue Mail, which is our mass system. And when I go into Aspen and I search for all, I select all students, and then I draft an email, the first box that comes up is students, because we want to communicate with our students. We feel it's an important responsibility for them as young adults to learn how to communicate appropriately. And our enrollment at the time was right around where it is now, so it's about 1,700 students. And at the time, we had almost 100% in terms of having student-based emails into the Aspen portal, because it would show up and you'd say you're getting ready to send this to 650 recipients. Then you click the contacts box and it loads the number of contact emails that you have. So that's either mother, father, grandmother, whatever guardian is in the home. And when you click that, the number would change from 650 to maybe a little over 2,000. So we were at less than probably 50% of having parental email addresses in the system. Now we actually have more than a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of the emails that are going on. So we've created a culture where it's an expectation that you communicate, that we communicate electronically, and as Mr. Bull said, it is decreasing the number of phone calls. And one of the things that we have to look at, and I'm not sure how it is at the other levels, but because the Aspen portal is so effective in terms of communicating progress, we're seeing somewhat of a decrease in terms of participation at parent conferences. And we want to try to find a way to, reverse that trend, because we do want parents to come into the building and be able to have that face-to-face interaction with the teachers.
Mr. Rudy, would you say that the student emails that you have, are there personal emails, or is it an Attleboro-based email, or what kind of? It's an email they check regularly, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, at the time that we started off, we didn't have the Attleboro PS.net account for our students, so it was their Gmail or their Yahoo or whatever the case may be.
And I guess the reason why I'm asking is earlier we talked about college preparedness, and I'm wondering if, again, going back to the surveys, if we can start to use some of those email addresses to reach out to our freshmen, our sophomores who are off in college, and give us some data to say, hey, how are you doing? Where did we really do well in terms of preparing you for college, and where, if you had any advice for us. I think some of those indicators that we have in terms of SAT scores and AP scores are interesting, and they give us some data, but I'm not sure how reliable it is in terms of the long term, because there's a lot of factors that go into college readiness, particularly social and emotional. I see it with my students at URI. So, just an interesting.
Our guidance
thought.
department does do some of
Oh,
that.
excellent. Okay.
But you're right. I mean, Aspen is so versatile, especially, with Ms. Pereira coming on board a few years ago as the Aspen project manager. we can go into the class of 2015, and to the greatest extent that those email addresses are still alive.
Right.
And that they're still using them rather than a .edu account, at their school, we would be able to communicate with them that way as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
I just want to close out this section on engagement with the tremendous community support that we saw with regard to the Tozier Cassidy concession stand last year and the prior year. Remember the Steve Newman track and the Tozier Cassidy athletic field. The tremendous community support for those things. Next section deals with infrastructure, and Mrs. Regan will pick up the baton.
So we are continually increasing the amount of technology that we have in the district. Last year, we were able to have 1 Chromebook and 28 Chrome carts for each elementary school as well as middle school. Last year, we provided some professional development on the use of the Chromebook and all of the different applications that go with the Google platform. The Chromebooks also supported our ability to have computer-based testing at the elementary level. A couple of the areas to highlight are phasing in of document cameras and projectors for classroom teachers, purchasing of 12 new iMacs for the Mac Lab and the CTE. The old Macs that were currently in there went to the graphic arts department. There were 53 desktop computers that replaced old, obsolete Windows 7 computers, and the broadband was increased from 10 megabits per second to 100, which helped to allow us to stream videos and data without spooling, and it was actually nice to see that you could actually click on a link and it would actually open up right away. And we also added in end computing servers to continually to store our data, just because we have so much more information to store at this point.
Mr. Storrs?
Yeah, I just want to touch base on the Chromebooks, because you mentioned how it was used to support the park test, the computer-based park test, which I think it's important to know first, those Chromebooks did not come from state funding, state or federal funding. And the park test, of course, was indeed a mandate from the
Right.
government. So in a lot of ways, those Chromebooks was an unfunded mandate that is just continuing, because as I understand it, we don't have enough Chromebooks in each school at this time for them to take the test, because if you have a grade of 100 students, many of the elementary schools have about 100 fourth graders, 100 third graders. If they only have 1 Chromebook card of 28, you guys have to, somebody has to haul those Chromebooks across the district to the schools, and if you have 5 schools who, by law, have to take that test at the same exact moment, we can't do it. Is that a fair assessment?
Do you
There
wanna
are
speak to that?
2 Chrome carts per elementary at this point. So 2 classes take them can session through, and then the next session would be the next 2 classes. So what we currently do is both sessions can be done by noontime, and so our entire grade would be done. And then the next week we switch to 4th grade.
So as of right now, they don't have to take it at the same time?
No, we have an 8:30 to 10 slot, and then we have a 10:15 to 12, depending on the length of the session that's being done.
They have to take the test
Test on the same
on the
day.
same day,
Yeah.
Right,
not at the
same
same
day,
time.
right.
But I think your point is well made,
Yeah.
that it was a state mandate
Right.
park test, and it was going to be an online version. But because of that, and because of where each district was infrastructure-wise or availability technology-wise, that's why we now have the paper version.
And I would like to add on that, a very important point that you raised, that the formula that determines how much state aid Attleboro will get was created without any of this technology in mind, 1993. Okay? So that is currently being, there's a study group to look at it. And I don't know where that is in the legislature right now, but that is such an enormous piece to not even be in the formula that determines how much money schools like Attleboro get.
Mr. Geddes?
Thank you, Mr. Withers. Hearing this, going back to my earlier point, again, huge appreciation to our educators for doing so much with so little, but also appreciation to all of our community partners that are listed here in the report, from grants to everyone that supported the Blue Pride Ambassador Club fundraiser that brought more technology. All of these great donations are hugely helpful, and I don't think we can show our appreciation enough for those donations. But it's still not enough. To what Mr. Storrs was just saying, I mean, it's an appalling situation. At our last meeting, Mr. Rooney mentioned some dinosaur-aged computers, and Mr. Furtado mentioned that there are computers in this district that are from 2010 and have not been updated or utilized since. So hearing that we are excited that we can click on a link and it opens, or hearing that we can stream a video, it's, compared to some of the other districts, it's in my opinion, it's unacceptable, and it's something that we need to address. Again, we're not asking for the world when we ask for this money. It's for stuff that we need, not to be the best in the state, although that is our goal. It's to keep up with the rest of the state.
Right.
Mr. Quinn?
And I would just say, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit too, is that it's the Chrome carts are not just sitting idle until test time.
No, they're
You
fighting
know what I mean?
over them, right?
That, you went back to the 21st century skills. One of my areas of interest is internet research and how students, become lifelong learners and finding not just, the information that they need, but the networks that they need. So if there is a silver lining to this and bringing these Chrome carts in, it's the ability to research, to create, to make, and then to share products and lessons that our teachers provide. So,
Thank you. We're now at the part of the program where our principals will speak to the various levels they represent. And the first to speak will be Mr. Rooney about the secondary schools.
Well, first of all, excuse me, it's an honor to be a part of a team that's presenting here tonight. Obviously, leadership of the central office, Mr. Sheehan, Mr. Sawyer, and all the tremendous hard work that Ms. Dyer and Ms. Regan put into this annual report. Certainly, it's very data driven, but as far as the high school is concerned, what it does is it validates the story of what we are. We are a 9 through 12 plus small city, as I like to refer to it, of almost 2,000 people every single day. And I think that the annual report really speaks to the level of inclusivity of our Blue Pride community. One of my favorite sayings is that Attleboro High School is the place to be. And I think some of the things that have already been mentioned about the high school and a few things that I'd like to mention tonight will show that's the case. First of all, we have alternative pathways for students who might struggle with accessing the curriculum in a large environment like we have. The Attleboro Community Academy and the Network Alternative Program have both been very successful and have helped us statistically, but also have helped us culturally, because we do want to educate all students. And those who may struggle with a particular discipline, or someone who may struggle with just some social emotional struggles, have been able to find success through the Attleboro Community Academy or through the Network Alternative Program. I think it's also important, as already has been mentioned, but to provide some further evidence of our strong community presence. Our Special Olympics is an extremely important event for us every single year, but we're very proud that at the high school we now have a Best Buddies program that was modeled after the highly successful program at Brennan Middle School, but also through other parts of the state. And I realize that this is the 14-15 annual report, but very excited about the upcoming Best Buddies prom that a lot of our students are going to participate in. Whether it's working with the Alumni Association for the Community Leaf Project, having our students go out to various job sites, or being asked by the mayor and the municipal council to be able to have our design and visual students create signage for new projects that are going to be coming up, whether it's some aspect of the new transportation center or the Riverwalk. it's clear that, you know, the respect that is held for the high school in the city has steadily increased. The data also shows that, you know, our students are being held to very high expectations, and that's evidenced by a graduation rate that's on the climb, an admirable dropout rate that continues to improve, as well as high rates of college acceptance at outstanding schools. And we also don't want to underestimate the importance of the positive placement of our CTE graduates who are either going out into the workforce, who are in a college program, or are respected members of our military. And as Ms. Regan mentioned, our mantra at the high school is obviously Blue Pride, but we break pride down into personal responsibility is developed every day. We believe in respecting ourselves, respecting one another, the little things, holding doors open for people, picking up trash, whether it belongs to us or not, pushing in chairs in the cafeteria. They seem like little things, but they really do affect the culture. I was meeting with my student support team today, and we were looking at some conduct data from the last couple of years, and you know, some of the initial aspects of PBIS that we've been discussing, as well as just an increased push for personal responsibility, has proven out in fewer suspension days, fewer detentions. So we're seeing buy-in from our student body, but that's driven by the fabulous, passionate staff that we have at the high school. As proud as we are of our 4 National Merit Commended Scholars and recognition on the national level by the Washington Post, you know, what truly makes us proud is the increasing level of respect that we do have in the community. You know, we're trying to change the narrative of Attleboro High School. There was a time where Attleboro High School, understandably so, you know, did have some notable flaws, and those flaws were manifested sometimes in the media, sometimes just in the community. And what we're working hard is to try to change that perception, and I feel confident that we're doing so. And again, like I said, it's our passionate staff that's getting it done every single day. But you know, you see community support. Mr. Geddes mentioned the Blue Pride Ambassadors Club. Ms. Dyer mentioned the $500,000 that we saved by having volunteers. Many of you in this room contributed to that by building the concession stand at the Tozier Cassidy Field and Steve Newman track. So it is, I believe it's an accurate statement that Attleboro High School is the place to be. So.
Mr. Bowlesville.
I don't really like being in the middle, but that's okay. I first want to thank all of you for taking the time to really listen to us 100%. On a personal, this is my 4th year here in the district, and every day I'm reminded that Attleboro is a very special place to work, and it is a privilege to work here. We have wonderful students, we have wonderful educators in front of our students every day, and it's just reassuring that we have a school committee that's supportive of both groups as we take this road and journey together and making the best possible academic situation for all our students and our staff. So I do want to thank all of you for your dedication and the resources that you have given to us. The middle schools, I represent the 3 middle schools, and I'm going to look at it through the lenses of the 4 standards or what we look at through the whole school improvement plan. The first one of curriculum planning and assessment in teaching all students. As Mrs. Regan and Mrs. Dyer both mentioned before, we've had established professional learning communities for some time in the school. And a couple of those examples are grade levels. We have professional communities, learning communities based on the contents. But one of the other facets are instructional leadership teams that make instructional decisions at the building level, which is a shared leadership and a shared responsibility, which I think is a vital piece to the success of all the schools in the district. What we did this year as a middle school level is, instead of focusing on just the big picture or the whole school improvement plan, we really looked at it through 3 different lenses. 1, as the whole group of the student body. 2, as small groups of pockets of students. And then as the individual needs of the students, which ties into the new strategic plan of individual learning plans. Through those lenses, we were able to focus on specific research-based programs and practices that really utilize the teacher's craft in how they assess and educate the students, whether it's through UDO, whether it's for Universal Design for Learning, or whether it's the UBD framework of backwards design. These aspects of curriculum instruction really have enhanced our students' experiences at the middle school level. Another great facet of the professional learning communities, we are giving educators, and when I say educators, teachers, the paraprofessionals, times to come together and meet and really have true discussions. Not in the sense where they meet every 3 weeks, but on a daily basis, giving them whether it's common planning times or set times throughout the day so they can have these meaningful discussions, and through these discussions actually come up with a plan for the whole group of students, small groups of students, or individual students. And the way some of the outcomes of that are evidence-based practices to use in the classroom, whether it's UDL, UBD, reciprocal teaching, walkthroughs, not only by the administration, but by other teachers going into other classrooms and looking at practices that are going on for the students. Teachers having the availability through the Google platform to share model lessons or units and assessments and things of that nature. And then once again, going back to the time to really sit down and collaborate, not in 15, 20 minutes, but giving them large chunks of time to sit down and really iron out all the kinks and refine their practices to make it the best for the students. And the other two standards, family and community engagement. Obviously, the high school has set the precedence for community outreach, and we've taken that and sort of encompassed that using things like Facebook and Twitter, utilizing the Aspen platform to really reach out to the masses of students and families instantaneously, whether it's school notices, grades, things of that nature. But we're also using other online resources to help with information that needs to get out there quickly. One of them is an application called Remind 101. It sends a quick text message to the parents about upcoming events. Some teachers just use it to send it to the students and the parents of a homework assignment for that night. So, once again, it's instantaneous. The other things that we've also done, not only with the community outreach, but is also having activities for the middle school students. Unfortunately, when students come into the 5th grade, they don't want their parents involved as much, but we want the parents involved. So we have created activities and sort of events to bring the parents into the schools. Arts, crafts shows at the middle schools, student faculty fundraising basketball games. Those are the type of events where we involve the parents and say, it is okay for you to be a part of your child's life here at the middle school. And then another big part of this is how we contribute and help support the community, whether it's through the Attleboro Food Pantry, whether it's during the holiday season of giving to needy families. I think that really is a testament to Attleboro as a community, the willingness to give back to the community from the schools. I think that's a testament to the Attleboro educators and the students. And then one of the greatest things I think that we've just embarked on this year is really every school in the district becoming a Feinstein Foundation leadership school. I think that's a great community outreach program, and it's the good work that we've been doing. Now we're associated with the Feinstein Group, which is great. And then the last is professional culture. Like I said, this is my 4th year here, and this is a culture here in Attleboro that I would not trade for the world. Our teachers are willing to sit down, willing to discuss, try new innovative things, and really look at the big picture and those little finite things that need to be adjusted. And at the focal point of everything, it's all about the students. Too oftentimes we hear about other stories where it's not about the students. One thing I can wholeheartedly say as a district, it's about the students, which I'm really happy about. But other things about what's best for students, we've started to take a more active approach to technology with the help of the PTO and fundraising, getting Chrome carts in the building, purchasing Elmos and projectors for almost every classroom at the Coelho Middle School and other schools, but also using this platform of Google for teachers to share their ideas in their lesson plans, but also being able to share with their students. This is a new wave of education, and it's exciting. And I think without this professional culture, which has been established already, we would not be able to move into that sort of 21st century. But I'm really happy about what's going on at 3 middle schools. I'm really proud of that. So once again, I'm going to leave it to Joanne to talk about the elementary schools.
Ms. Gills?
Just thank you. This committee, we've been very supportive, and we've provided extra financial resources for you, for the middle schools,
Yes.
to improve their after-school programming. Can you kind of touch base on where we are with that? Have we seen improvement, expansion?
So since I became here, that has always been a focal point of the school committee, which I want to thank you for that, and I'd be remiss not to mention that without you helping me. We've seen a dramatic improvement in the amount of kids staying after school. I don't know what Brennan and Wamsutta per se based on numbers, but I know they have seen increased students taking advantage of staying after school. We offer more clubs to kids now. We offer a more consistent basis for transportation. We've always come with the idea and foundation that in order to keep kids engaged in school, you have to provide these auxiliary activities after school to make them want to stay. We have seen that, and the money is going to a great resource in providing these kids with this type of experience. Just to give you a quick example, Wamsutta has a connection with Sensata in their robotics. This year, we tied into BCC in Vex Robotics, which 2 of our teachers are advisors for the students. They actually built 2 programmable robots, and they went into a competition. Like, this is our first year, and this is an after-school club or activity. They were going up against schools that have this as a class during the school day, that it's a regular class every single day. The 2 groups that we sent to the regionals, they did very well. One of the groups came in first, and now we're going to the state in Worcester later on this year. So once again, this is the dedication of the students to be invested after school. The teachers, like, to be honest with you, these teachers are remarkable. Mr. Martin, Ms. Holmes, that are doing this. They spend 8 hours at Durfee High School for this competition to sit with these kids and meet with these kids, and they got their own transportation provided and things of that nature, and like, it was very remarkable. And they were, the best part of this, they were excited when they came back. They were proud to be a part of something, and they saw their sense of accomplishment. So to answer your question, yeah, we do see the benefits of it, and we're excited that the school committee is so willing to give us that money to use in a positive manner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and now Mrs. De Palma will talk about the elementary school.
The follow-up, these 2.
Yes, that's got to be
That's for
hard,
last.
because I know that one of the approaches that we're all using is to talk about district-wide initiatives, and many of them have been mentioned already.
Yes, they have.
Discussed a few of them.
Let's repeat. First, I too would like to thank you all for helping and supporting our district. I know we work well together as a team, and I look forward to that continuing. We do a lot of work on the elementary level, as you know. There are 5 of us. I get to represent all 5. I hope I do it well. One of the things that we have worked on our particular level has been to unite the 5 communities. Being 5 buildings, sometimes things can look different, and we are trying as best we can to kind of unify what's going on amongst the 5 elementary buildings. That's not always easy. It's a mammoth task in a lot of ways, but we're working on that. And that's one thing we'd really like to highlight, because last year was a particularly successful year in that we really started moving forward together, and that was a huge plus for all of our buildings. We worked together on several different layers and levels, I guess would be the best way to put it. Connecting our technology kind of pieces, like, what are you doing over there? Let's bring that over here. Can we share? And why rewrite what's already been written, kind of idea. If you have something that we can use, can we bring it over here? The communication is there now, and it's getting stronger every day, and we appreciate that. One of the, again, on the elementary level, technology has come a long way in the last year or so. Speaking back to your point, last year, we didn't have as many Chrome cards. By the end of last year, we had doubled. That's huge. I mean, that's partially due to the system helping us pay for carts, and also two PTOs assisted us significantly. I know I can speak for my own PTO, who purchased a full Chrome cart set for us, which was a huge undertaking. I know Hill Roberts received a classroom set of iPads, which is another, wonderful gift to a school being used successfully and consistently throughout the year. And it changes the environment. And I'll tell you, the Chrome carts, their sign-up lists, pretty impressive.
Long.
Yeah, you kind of have to lock it up so nobody pushes each other out of the way. Because they want that technology. They want their kids to be participating. They want to go on virtual field trips and write about it, because it has meaning, and it's exciting to the kids, and it's really engaging. The kids have come a long way, from when they come to us in kindergarten and only knowing how to touch a pad, having to learn how to use a keyboard, learning to use a mouse, how to use a mouse. And this all leads up to your level and then to yours. It's the foundation. It's the beginning. Just like we're out, talking to our students about basically pride. Let's talk about helping each other, holding doors. It all begins here. And it's important that we're all on the same page to help support you and then support the high school as well. So it's a nice continuum. All the buildings engaged with Facebook last year, which was a challenger for some, a little harder for some, a little easier for others. It's been incredibly successful, I have to say. I can tell you for a fact that it increased our participation in some of our after-school activities. Our pumpkin glow, for instance, at Studley, almost doubled. You there? It was quite crowded, and it was people from Norton and from different communities that it was pretty impressive. And it's nice to get us out there, and that happened in other buildings as well. That's a big plus. That gets Attleboro out there, and we want that in a positive way. It also allows us to communicate almost instantly with a good number of our families, who then share with other families. So with our email blasts and follow up with Facebook, we're doing really well connecting. I think that's very important. I know that many of you like our pages, and it's nice for us to see your names click on something. Again, it brings that community feel. That's very important to us, and our kids love being on it. You're stars.
Studley stars.
Studley stars. And speaking of, we too are doing PBIS. We were one of the first buildings, but along with us was Thatcher, and it was a big undertaking last year to get us ready to begin PBIS. Hill Roberts actually has a foundation in PBIS, even though they're not in one of these cohorts. Part of that is because they were already a little bit further along, which was very impressive. They have a good core moving along. So we're all moving forward with positive behavior interventions and supports. This has been significant for each of us. And we're helping, again, it goes back to we're helping each other. This is what we have, can you use it? That's important. It's hard when you're trying to connect 5 different roofs, making sure we're all moving in the same direction and can help each other. It's been a huge success, I know, in what we have been doing. We are moving slow, going back to implementation science. We're going slow because we want it to be successful, and we want it to be sustainable. And we want it to be sustainable in an easy way, not something that's a financial burden. That takes time to organize, plan, think about all the loopholes that could come up. And we're still working on that, but we're moving forward. Our boxes come to our schools as well. Many of our elementary schools participate with Reebok, and they support a morning program, exercise program, where they provide us training. We provide, our parents can go, our teachers can go. In our building, we have several teacher volunteers. I know other buildings have a very heavy parent volunteer. We do have some parent volunteers with our group. Reebok trains our staff. They come in the morning. You've never seen kids so excited to be there at 7:30 in the morning. Wait until they get to you. Because they're thrilled to be there. And they participate.
At least they'll be accustomed to the early times.
Yeah, we're working on that. Our kids are up. They participate in this activity. They do it as a group. They celebrate their successes, and then they start their day. It makes a difference in how their brain functions for the day. And it's exciting to see. They're thrilled to be there. That was a huge piece to even affecting our behavior. It worked perfectly with PBIS. Those are kind of our whole district pieces. There are several other pieces. We work hard on a lot of different items. But some specific highlights. Willett right now is seeing success with their student support center, which helps our the students in the building stay focused, stay in class. If they're having a rough day, they have a place to go, sort it out, figure it out, and get back to where they need to be. That's headed by their adjustment counselor. They're very proud of the work that's being done. They're working to develop it even more, and it's showing positive effects for the building. Thatcher continues to work meeting or exceeding the state's gap narrowing target for ELA and math for both the aggregate and the high needs group. That's a pretty, Thatcher has a lot going on. They work hard to meet this need. They work hard, and their staff are committed to doing so. Studley, we're very proud of the work we've done to develop our sense of community. Bringing in our community. We have a lot of different cultures in our building, and we try really hard to make them all feel comfortable and welcomed within our building. We do a lot of work, particularly in that area, alongside with all of our other pieces. We also tried to increase our PTO attendance, because we really feel if we can get the parents involved now, hopefully that will continue on to the middle school and to the high school. Because again, they'll feel comfortable, they'll have a purpose, they'll fit in, and they'll have a direction to go in. We've increased our high interest presentations for PTO meetings to hopefully bring in more people. Hill Roberts, I was impressed with this. Hill Roberts participated in this Scholastic Summer Reading Challenge, which was fantastic. I was very impressed with their numbers. They competed for top reading honors with schools around the world by logging in the number of minutes that they were reading. They ended up coming in number 2. They were the number 2 school in Massachusetts. That's impressive. Yeah, that's very impressive. And on top of that, they were 102 out of the 6,637 schools that participated worldwide.
Wow.
That's impressive, yes. And we are particularly proud of Hyman Fine receiving a commendation from the state for narrowing the proficiency gaps. That's a big deal, and we are very proud of the work that went on to make that happen. Overall, our schools really are moving forward. They're working hard to work together. We are, as you said, passionate teachers everywhere. I am so proud to walk down the halls and to walk in any building, because I know that the first question is going to be, is it right for the student? And that's what we should do.
So 2014, question.
Mr. Storrs.
I know at the high school and I've heard at the middle school about the community partnerships. Can we speak about the elementary level community partnerships that are going on?
Absolutely. There's actually a few different pieces that are, Reebok being a major one right now. But there's more. Our pieces aren't necessarily bigger companies, although there might be some pieces going on in other buildings. Ours is very community-based in the sense that we're directly giving back to our community. We're a Feinstein, all of our buildings are Feinstein Leadership buildings. We've been one for a while. But even without that, we would do this. Our food drives are bringing in, actually you probably all received a letter from Studley asking you to come in, because you're part of our community, you're an important part of your leadership in our community. We ask for a lot of that, and each of our buildings do that. As for companies, right now, Reebok is I think our major supporter in order to get their whole program up and running. We would like to see more. We work also a lot with the smaller community groups, Self and things like that. We're helping connect our families. A lot of what we do is foundational work, where families are just coming to us and looking for connections to the community because it's their first time and first ability to do so. And we connect. Well, that's our job, is to help them connect and take care of themselves. That's our focus for the most part, but that's just as important as a community need as any. And we do a lot of that. We connect a lot of people with each other to help support our families.
2014-15, laying the groundwork for this year. I'd like to now, it's not possible for me to thank everybody that has had a role in this, but I must mention the graphic arts department, which put together the booklet for the annual report. I had an occasion to go to Staples and have them print, and I will tell you the cost was 10 times what it is here. So I couldn't believe the professionalism, and it actually looks better than my Staples copy because the quality of the paper was thicker and better. Very proud of the work that Mr. Ramos and his students have done there. We had La Prade Studios contribute photographs, to the annual report, and Mr. Hopkins' photo on Tozier Cassidy Field is there, and he's a professional photographer. Kevin DiBiasio and Sue Casey were really instrumental in locating lots of photo resources, and of course Mrs. Casey did the cover. Hers is the cover contribution. Many contributions also came from Facebook ambassador groups. So I, combed through there to find the things that parents were excited about. Obviously, parents who gave permission to have their children profiled for their, what they're engaged in, challenged in, and inspired by. Anybody who worked on the strategic plan, obviously central to the document that we made. All of the administrators had a piece in describing their schools. The curriculum office, Mrs. Gomes in our office did a second reading of the report with her Katie Gibbs skills, which I was very grateful for. And of course Aspen and OIT, and very importantly the school committee. So thank you very much.
Mr. Geddes?
Thank you, Mr. Withers. Again, thank you for presenting, and thank you for your efforts. As I'm thinking about over the past, I think it was 5 years, seeing a 12-13% increase in our graduation rate, a 3+% decrease in our dropout rate. I think from the business perspective, it's great customer service. They obviously like the product. And I think that, as all of you said, it really starts with our educators. And it's not just at the high school level. Yes, the Attleboro Community Academy, Mrs. Cameron and her staff, the network program and all of their supports, the guidance staff at the high school, critical to that graduation rate and that decreased dropout rate. But it really is all levels. And as each of you were talking, as I was thinking more about the Engage, Challenge, Inspire, it's not just about each of our teachers engaging, challenging, and inspiring our students. It's literally all three levels. Our elementary schools engaging our students, our middle schools challenging them, and our high school inspiring them. So I think this is a clear demonstration of that. So I'm I'm excited to have my daughters going here. And I'm just, again, grateful for everything you and your staffs do. Thank you.
I would like to ask the committee to do something that would help me. This was the first annual report that I've published. I know that my predecessor published one that was encyclopedic in the number of pieces of information that were there. When I look at other districts in the state, I see much thinner 12-page reports are being put out by others for their annual report. And so when it comes to shaping the next annual report, any thoughts that you have, if you could put them in writing and send them to Jay Dyer at Attleboro Schools, things you want to see more of, things you saw somewhere else that you thought should be in a report, those kinds of things would be very helpful in shaping the next report.
I want to just thank you all. I mean, I think this was a great presentation. The annual report and the presentation were very thorough and in depth, and I think that's good. That's important. Where it's important to show the community and everyone, the work that's being done on a daily basis to go along with the strategic plan, and also just to make sure our schools are continuously improving. And it does take a lot of work, and I think it's, for me, I think it's important to get this sort of depth to understand what goes on. So thank you. I know, obviously it was a large undertaking for all of you, so I appreciate your efforts.
Forgive me, where will this be available for anyone in the community that wants
On
to
the
see it?
web.
Is it up on the website? Okay.
Yep, it will be on the website.
Also, hard copies will be provided to the town library in our schools as well as at City Hall.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Rooney, Mr. Bowles, Mrs. Palmer, thank you very much. Mrs. Regan and I are staying for the park presentation if you're ready, or maybe you want to break in between, I don't know.
It's power on.
All right. I like the spirit. PARC stands for the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers. It is a group of states that got together and decided on common assessments for students based on a common core of standards. In Massachusetts, 54% of the districts determined to go with a PARCC exam last year, and the remaining 46% stayed with MCAS, which was their option. This year, we don't have that option. If you took PARCC, you take PARCC again. If you took MCAS, you do have some degree of choice. So 752 schools in the grades 3 to 8 taking the test, and 113 in grade 9. There were, for the PARCC exam, 3 sessions for the performance-based assessment in English language arts, and 2 sessions for the end-of-year testing that went with PARCC, for a total of 5 ELA sessions. And in math, there was just 1 fewer, so 4. This occupied March and also May of last year, a good deal of testing time. There are some state leaders elsewhere who have concluded that being compared to other states and their demographics was not politically tenable, and so they started to draw out of the PARCC consortium, but now it is growing again. And so what they've done with PARCC, and I don't know if Mrs. Regan's going to explain any more of that, but they've divided it into tiers with different levels of engagement with PARCC now possible. Were you going to talk about
Do you want me to? I can
If you could
elaborate.
throw it in there, and then I can put this one
So,
in there.
what PARCC has done to maintain some of the states on as a PARCC state is they've broken it out into tiers. So there's tier 1A and 1B, where 1A would be taking on the full PARCC assessment with Pearson as the provider, and 1B would be the full PARCC assessment, finding your own provider. If you're on 2A, it would be taking on some of the questions and possibly matching them according to your standards and doing something on your own with them, possibly modifying them. And then 2B would just be taking bits and pieces of questions that you would need to modify yourself in whatever platform you decide to use. So they've broken it out into different sections.
Ms. Quinn?
Has Commissioner Chester given any indication about where, I know we're moving towards a hybrid, so based on what you know of those descriptions and the limited that he's made commentary, would Massachusetts be a 1A, a 1B, a 2A, a 2B? I know the participation rate's fallen from something like 24 states down to 7 or 8 at this point.
It's up to 11 now. That's what I meant about
Okay.
it's the,
So the 11 would be some of the people in tier 2?
yes,
Yes.
Okay.
exactly, caught on
Okay.
immediately.
And I
Yes.
think Massachusetts, I'm not exactly sure which tier they're falling in. They're either in either 2A
not sure they
or
know, but-
2B. Yeah.
Okay.
2A or 2B, though, it doesn't seem like they're
B,
one.
not 2B.
Yes.
That is the question.
Yeah, we're not taking the full.
Okay.
Source?
You had mentioned about the testing. Now, MCAS seemed pretty obvious. 1 math test and 2 ELAs over the course of a year for a student. And now it sounded, I heard 5, and I heard, what was the other number? Help me out.
4
So
for
are we
math.
talking 9 testings?
Last year, yes.
Last year, for 1 student?
Yes.
Well, MCAS was usually spread over several days, however, so in terms of time, it was more. And there were communities that did in fact experience a situation where they had just finished their performance-based assessment 2 weeks later because of scheduling in their particular building, they were taking the end of the year. It's a work in progress, like anything, when it begins, there are going to be things that need to be fixed, and they count on things like the Massachusetts Association of School Committees to advocate and ask for what they need, and on parents and on schools and other people to go on. Mrs., yes, you're going to add something before I go to
This year, though, they've modified the window and there's only
Right.
one testing window, and the number of sessions is different. So they've combined the performance-based assessment as well as the end-of-year assessment into just one session.
Right. And that is an obvious improvement. Mrs. Reagan's going to talk about the welcome factors with regard to a park, and I'm going to talk about the challenges, and then we'll see a coming together of minds here.
With the new Common Core, with the new frameworks that we have, a more rigorous test was needed for college preparedness. Students with this next generation assessment are being asked to answer a question, but then the next question follow up. Well, how do you know that? Why is that? And being able to go back into a text to determine, the finer details really shows that they do comprehend what they're reading. Park had potential to compare across states, but because that pool of states is becoming smaller, that's not where it's going. But it is based upon uniform standards for everyone across the United States. Within Park right now, there are universal accommodations. So students are able to have what they're calling accessibility features. And within those accessibility features, things that were only available to students on IEPs are now available to everyone who takes this test. So for example, audio amplification, a bookmark, an answer eliminator, a line reader, a highlighter tool. These are all things that anyone can use while they're taking that assessment.
Good, thank you. The challenges, I'm sure many of you have heard. First of all, this was the first time that we were giving the park. And for a third grader taking a timed computer test, that was a big step into the future. The writing component did get a lot of national press where it was computer-based because children were writing less. Some of them just didn't understand that the little space they were writing in would become scrolled if only they continued. I mean, so that has to do with familiarity with the testing environment and the degree of preparation and practice that is being had. If this were the only avenue for testing, computer-based, you wouldn't expect a great deal of progress. But we've built into our district common assessments computer-based testing elsewhere, so they get more practice, or they're getting more practice now. Writing for Park assessed multi-genre, whereas MCAS specifically was looking at narrative writing. So there were 3 genres, I believe, that were tested in Park. The correlation with MCAS involves advanced statistical analysis. I'm going to show you a bit of that a little later on. I won't go too deep into the weeds, but just so that you can see some of the issues. The state admits that this was a difficult test, and the state figures at average 8 points lower than the MCAS, but there are places like in 3rd grade where it was 15, the state averages were 15 points lower than MCAS. So from 0 to minus 15 was about the range, which reflects the rigor of the test.
Mr.
That
Quinn?
they're not equivalent tests.
Compared to, just a quick question, point of clarification. Granted, we're seeing a little bit of a dip, but compared to your knowledge, to other states who have also taken the park,
Oh, they've seen bigger dips.
they've seen, so we're doing, even though there's been a dip in the scores, and it's more challenging tests, and I think this kind of leads to my second question. That first bullet point, the administration, can you talk to a little bit in terms of the design challenges that may be affecting the test a little bit in terms of knowing how to, you brought up the scroll box. I've also, read some research where in terms of scrolling on the screen, some of the highlights didn't stay. Can you, that interface I think is a really big confounding variable. I mean, even as a reading expert, you know that the resolution on paper is far greater than on a screen.
Right.
And particularly on a Chromebook. I mean, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I'm just, can you talk a little bit about the different nature of this test versus,
Well, I'll give you one example with math. We teach our students to use tools like draw a picture of, make a model of, whatever. And on the test, they really had to rely on their narrative ability to explain how they resolved the issue. And although that's great for, for your English expository ability, it isn't what they were used to in terms of using tools and drawing their models, etc.
Another example of that is we are teaching our students how to annotate or to take notes as they're reading. There is a notepad available for particular questions, and I actually watched a student type a lot of notes about a particular passage that they had read, and then you went to the next question and it was completely gone. All of the time that the student had taken to type in that notepad was gone. But I know that she was able to go back in and actually go to that question and open up the notepad again. But it was just the logistics of the computer-based format versus the students that took it paper pencil were able to basically write all over
On
their
a timed
pieces.
test where you'd have to go back and you'd have to have an understanding of the ability to go back. So that we're talking about computer navigation, where kids have different levels of comfort and experience with computers.
Exactly.
Okay.
But that's precisely the reason why the Attleboro Public School Administration recommended, with the huge debate that took place last year, along with the other 54%, to go with the POC, to do the experimental piece, to iron out the glitches. The biggest challenge for the State Department of Education with regard to the score 0 to 15% is what percentage of that is knowledge and what percentage of that is computer, technology, keyboard skills, especially with the time test. So those things will all be ironed out. I'm glad that we had 1 year advantage over the other 46% of the cities in town who chose to go with MCAS.
Yeah, following up with Mr. Superintendent Sheehan, I mean, that was a large part of our decision-making this last year or the year before, was the fact that this really was, regardless of what you think of the test itself, seeing where we were going is an opportunity to get a chance to take this test, to take a computer test in a year where it doesn't quote-unquote count. Just some background.
Another factor to consider is that the gap narrowing targets remain in place. A harder test means the gap widened, for the state as well as for us. So unless there is a revision of the 2017 goals for narrowing the gap, it's a steeper climb from here to there than it was before. But there is obviously a great deal of advocacy to review that end goal for gap narrowing. We're in a state of transition. As Mrs. Reagan pointed out, last year they had the performance-based assessment and the end of year. This year they have a combination of both, but far fewer sessions. The next year we have MCAS 2.0, and they're looking by 2019 to have everything fully computerized. My own personal complaint as a data analyst is probably visual. This page with the long column, these are MCAS reports available to us. And these are PARC reports available to us. But they're growing in number, and the biggest one that was not there is the standards analysis and item analysis, so that you can go right in and find out what specifically children had difficulty with on any given test. And I know because MCAS 2.0 is within the state, we can get that back. If it had stayed at the national level, that was very difficult because there were so many different versions of the test out there that going into any set that were common to all of our students was difficult. There's this.
Mr. Geddes and Mrs. Squires.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Withers. Just for clarification, so the far fewer PARC reports, are they that much more in depth than the MCAS reports, or are they just as superficial as the MCAS reports, or just as, not superficial, but
Well, I'm not
just
gonna,
as specific.
I'm not gonna characterize them as superficial, but I will
Yeah.
say,
Poor choice of words,
here's
sorry.
some examples. Classroom item analysis roster, that was an MCAS report. So you could go in and see Johnny Jones, how did my Johnny Jones in my classroom do on item 7? And they released items to you, about a third of them or so, and you could actually see what the item was and be able to analyze, and then group your class accordingly. The way that, well, they don't have that comparable ability right now because of the complications involved with a national test. And when it's brought back to the state level, then that can come back. Assessment history wasn't there, obviously, because there was no history, right? So you couldn't look back over time and be able to analyze the growth data, since it was all transitional, with advanced statistics to analyze the growth data, also made it problematic for comparison, over time. So longitudinal studies and the growth study. There's a marvelous tool that the Department of Ed gives us called the MCAS Cube that allows for pivot tables in a variety of ways, manipulating the data, and that is not currently in place for the MCAS data. And it's very revealing when you use those pivot tables. So, I miss those kinds of things. So standards analysis, items analysis, pivot table, those are the kinds of things that I miss. Some of the others, we could make an argument for that one. I don't know if you're familiar with the growth chart that has one little circle in the middle of a quadrangle. And it says you're here. I mean, they're really showing what quadrant you're in, but I could probably miss that report.
Mrs. Torres?
You have more access to the data than we do, and in going into the data, I think the thing that I didn't like was I wasn't able to compare Park to the DART or to neighboring districts,
Right.
which is something I
Right.
do, every year. Beyond what we talked about before is not having that subgroup data was also very difficult because we only have it now for 10th grade. In looking at the Park data, I already mentioned this to you. One area that actually, I couldn't help but notice was, for some reason, compared to the state, it seemed like overall we did really well compared to the state, especially in 7th and 8th grade. But in 9th grade, there was a significant drop-off in our results, percentage-wise, between the level 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, compared to the state. Any idea what could have caused that? I know 9th grade normally doesn't take a test, but those students are used to taking tests because they've taken it in 8th grade since 3rd grade. But all of a sudden, was this a statewide thing? Is this a test-related issue? Did they make the 9th grade test a little too difficult? I mean, what could be?
Well, there were 2 tests, the ELA and the math. I can't speak to answering all of those questions, frankly, right here, because I don't have the data in front of me. But I would say one factor in the math was that Algebra 2 was part of the Algebra 1. There were skills. If you were a 9th grader and you were in Algebra 1, you were seeing some Algebra 2 in there. So I know that played into it. There was the option factor. It was optional for grade 9. They didn't have to do it as did grades 3 to 8 because they had the MCAS. And high school students, being as they are, hear a word like option and misinterpret from time to time. And I would just recall what happened when MCAS went out for the first time, and it was mischaracterized as it doesn't really count. So I don't know, and I don't have a way to actually test how much of a factor that was for grade 9, and I'd rather get back to you with more substantive report.
That'd be great.
On that. And so where are we? The next slide, and this is where Mrs. Regan and I agree. We anticipated that the test would be more difficult. Children experienced it as more difficult. State scores proved it was indeed more difficult. But here's the key. This kind of test is the reality for the future. This is what it's going to be. Therefore, the more practice our youngsters have between now and 2019, when it goes computerized, the better served they are. If we had chosen to stay with MCAS and the familiarity and the comfort and all of the wonderful reports that they have, the downside is, come 4 years later, when those children are faced with a computer-based test in the 3rd grade that's timed, they won't have anywhere near the kinds of practice that we've built in over these upcoming years. So it is a bullet to bite, but there's no value in kicking the can down the road from my perspective or from hers, and I gather from the committees as well. So,
Mr. Quinn?
It's more of a kind of a curriculum question, and while I recognize the value of not kicking the can down the road and preparing them for this type of interface, I do get concerned about spending time not only testing but also test prep. Have we thought about potential strategies that would allow students to do both meaningful work that's related to the standards, but would also get them used to, let's just say, typing into a box, like for a comment section on a blog, and learning how to interact in a community setting like that? I guess as we're talking about personalized learning that's engaging, challenging, inspiring, I don't know as if test prep questions, and that hasn't been my experience here with Attleboro Public Schools, but have we been thinking about how to kind of
Bridge the gap.
thread
Yeah.
together, thread the needle?
but Mrs. Regan is in a wonderful position to talk about School City, which is organized for testing online, much the way that Park is, and which houses our district common assessment in ELA. So if you could talk about what the environment is for our students taking their district common assessments, that would be good.
So specifically in grades 3 and 4, our students are taking an online test similar to one that they would see in Park. The passage is on one side of the screen. They can scroll up and down, and the questions are on the right side of the screen, and as they click to the next question, the passage remains and the questions continue. When they go to answer their open response questions or their just written pieces, again, there's a box similar to the one that they would see, and they're being asked to complete the same types of questions, first written and then typed. So during class instructional time, they're being asked to answer, kind of like a bridge, as you were talking about before, to answer their questions. As they would normally in a written fashion, with the teacher modeling and sharing with them all the strategies that need to be included to answer a question like that appropriately, but then also taking the time to type it so that they can actually see, okay, how long does my piece need to be? And that's part of the instruction. I was in a classroom the other day, middle school classroom. They were actually typing an open response question without writing it first. And it was specifically a student with disabilities that I was actually watching, and he was able to utilize all of the resources in the tools embedded within that Google Doc platform. He was going back using the spell check devices. He was erasing what he had written, inserting, rereading what he had written. Of course, the teacher, you could see that the teacher was watching him at the same time, because in Google, the whole collaboration thing, the teacher can be on the page literally with you at the same time. And so the student was actually working hard and answering the teacher's questions in the margins to kind of support him through that process. So I think instructionally, we're helping to bridge that gap so students see what it looks like transferring from paper to a screen, but then again, sharing with them all of the strategies that are embedded within that tool so that they can revise and edit as they go.
And what about, I guess perhaps a more authentic learning context? I mean, it's good test prep.
Yep.
But in terms of, I guess I wouldn't answer, an online choice, and granted I'm not in 3rd or 4th grade, but I'm
Right.
just trying to think about as we're trying to bring real world relevant learning, and this is hard, this is not an easy question by any stretch of the imagination. I'm wondering to what extent can we continue to build those useful test taking strategies, but also in really kind of relevant real world context.
So important.
Yeah.
Did you have your hand up?
I did.
Sheehan?
This is a change from what had been done in the past. Our students are no longer learning to get an MCAS score in math or ELA. We're going to do authentic teaching and authentic learning. And as we move forward in the next year or two, we're going to be engaged in a concept called blended learning. And blended learning is going to take our curriculum and blend with it our technology availability and devices and enhance our instruction and learning capacities. By doing all of those pieces, it will be a natural progression from our students to automatically take any test that's online, to be able to use all of the tools that are there for them. And I'm talking from students from kindergarten up, not high school or whatever. So we're in that point. That's what we started 3 years ago with regard to getting a new bandwidth and providing the impetus from our operations committee and our instructional committee for technology by which to get to a point, and now it's about resources. We have the bandwidth, we need the resources, we have the intelligence by our teachers and administrators to move to that level of blended learning, so that will be a natural progression for kids. And especially starting in the kindergarten, we can see actually almost miracles taking place at Willard right now with regard to our computer-based classrooms and blending the technology with the curriculum and so forth. And that will all be enhanced, by the way, through Aspen as well, through our curriculum mapping pieces.
I had the pleasure of visiting a social studies presentation on problem solving, and I think several of you were there as well. And when you went into talking with the students about how they problem solved, they had come up with surveys that they developed online, and then they had to analyze the data from the surveys. They went out into the community and determined what kind of data they needed to gather. I mean, there were many pieces that relied on technology, but it was blended into solving a problem. That was civic-based in this particular case, but it didn't need to be. It could be scientific as well. We're getting there. We're not there yet.
It's a long.
It's the long haul,
I
moving
think
from here to there.
UDO actually addresses some of the things I was talking about in terms of, I was thinking annotation, comments, and it's a social collaborative piece where students are learning to interact with an
Blogging.
online text,
Yes.
blog, writing a comment in a timed amount of space.
In the Google Doc.
Yep, exactly, yep.
Combination of those. They're used to those.
And the other piece of that is Quest, that's embedded within Aspen. That educational search engine, teachers are using that on a more regular basis, as some of our students are actually starting to use it too, just to research information.
Mr. Storrs?
I know that when the decision was made for Common Core, that part of Massachusetts, one of their state, their important points was that we were the highest achieving state in the nation, and that their other states probably couldn't compete with what we've done because of the Ed Reform Act and everything that had taken place over a long period of time. Part of it was that Common Core had a set guidelines of what you had to do, and that Massachusetts was going to go in excess of that. We were going to, I think it was allowed 55% or 15%, I forget what it was. We were allowed to go beyond what Common Core was going to specify, and I believe Massachusetts has done that. Now, PARC is effectively a test-to-test Common Core. So the question is, how do we ensure that that extra that we're doing to keep Massachusetts at the high level is being tested, since it's not part of the PARC test, the standardized test?
I know in the beginning there was discussion of fear of diluting the standards in Massachusetts, which in fact we've seen duplicated now. So if anyone has been a leader on a national plane, it has been Massachusetts. And part of the reason is because Mitchell Chester, who is our commissioner, is also heading up Park. So those fears didn't really turn out to be as founded as people thought they might be. And remember, Common Core's been part of our MCAS since 2011. The wonderful thing about Common Core is a level playing field from state to state to state. It is a terrible thing to do to a child to take one from, let's say, a Mississippi-like place, not that there's anything wrong with that, and then transfer that student into into a Massachusetts school where the standards may be significantly different. And that student's experience of learning is to come out feeling like they weren't prepared. But if you have common standards across states, you've leveled the playing field. Assessing them has been the challenge. You have to make sure you're testing what it is you say you're going to test.
In that regard, I've always felt if I was a school committee member in, Indiana or in Mississippi, I'd be right there with you, and I would think this is a wonderful thing. But I'm a school committee member in Massachusetts, and we're the #1 in the country.
Right.
And,
We'll continue to be.
And, when you have states that are not where we are, the tendency would be to pick something in the middle, which those lower states can reach, and that would be...
I think when we get into the next, the slide after the next, that may address that for you, because it actually went in the other direction in terms of how they classified people, at least. It's important to note before we get into how scores on Park were mapped to category cut scores on MCAS, to point out some differences in the way they talk about them. Content obviously was intended to be more rigorous, but the range of the scaled scores is very different. And that was a surprise in getting reports, I think, for some parents. The range for MCAS is from 699 to 850, and for MCAS 200 to 280. And that's kind of initially disorienting because you think you've understood it. Another thing that created some confusion is the term level 4. Because up until Park, level 4 was a bad thing. You don't want to be level 4, but now, of course, you want to be level 4 because that means you've met expectations. So this is the slide that I wanted to talk about. It is a busy slide, and it's got two main things that are really important to talk about. First, I put in a little red box the word representative. They wanted to have a representative MCAS group compared to a representative Park group. That means they're not talking about all the MCAS, and they're not talking about all the Park. And when they studied the demographics of the 46% that took the MCAS, they discovered that they were 10% better off economically than was the Park group. Now, they seem surprised by this, but I kind of looked at it. If I were a school with limited resources and I had the incentive to be held harmless, I might have elected to take Park. So that meant that the subset that is Park was poorer. And in order to make it representative, they selected a subset of that. Okay, so we have two groups being compared to one another that don't really represent the whole of, well, the MCAS group represents the whole, but the Park has been adjusted so that it looks demographically like the Park. The other thing, and I'd like to draw your attention to the curlicue that is off to the right of the dotted area, because that group used to be considered the top, the advanced. But that group is no longer considered that. They are met expectations. And you see it again, that's at level 5, between levels 5 and 4. And you see it again where the level 3 dotted area is. That group formerly was considered proficient and is now level 3. And they're grouped with other scores from 225 to 239. What that tells us is that expectations rose, all right, on this test. So that kind of answers in only partially what Mr. Storrs was getting at in terms of, what evidence is there that this new test hasn't lowered standards. But you will see conversely in the bottom, and this goes in the opposite direction, that those who, if you look at the 220 area, they would have been considered below that as warning or failing, but you'll see the corresponding area calls some of those needed improvement. So it's as though they pushed out from the middle on either end. I made those points. There were large groups, 71 to 75% of students who took PARC or MCAS in grades 3 to 8 in 2015. And they were selected. When I talked about representative, I should have mentioned that race, ethnicity, income, special needs were all part of the demographic matching. Question? Okay. All right, some good things here. That's what Martha Stewart says, right? It's a good thing. Attleboro Public Schools had 64% of its students exceed or meet expectations in ELA on the PARC overall. The state had 60%. If parents want to see how each grade and school did within, each grade within a school did, they can look at the annual report, which will be available online for grades 3 to 8. In the sub-scores, our economically disadvantaged students did relatively well, considering. The increased rigor in the exam was indeed challenging for our special needs students. Our ELL students performed basically on a par with the state. This is a good place to remind the veterans and to talk with the new folks on the committee about the new metric for measuring economic difficulties that students have. We used to have something called low income, and that dealt with free and reduced prices for lunch that you could apply for through the agriculture's nutrition program. That is not being used as a metric now. So the metric that's being used is called economically disadvantaged, and it had its birth with the community eligibility program. And what they expect is that the student is participating in one of these programs, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, Families with Dependent Children, Department of Children and Families. They're basic institutional programs. And so what we found is only 75% of what we formerly called low income are now classified as economically disadvantaged. So where do those other poor children go? All right, they're not in that metric anymore. And you might, but we need to look at this over time. It's the first year it's being used. We can't get these comparisons, but one might want to see if there's a correlation between the students no longer classified low that way and how they scored, because they may very well have been on the cusp. We'll see that. And for the math, Attleboro Public School students had 56% of its students exceed or meet expectations overall in math, grades 3 to 8, and the state had 52%. Again, that is a 4% differential overall in a favorable way with regard to math. And the sub-scores in math, very similar. I would like to remind everybody that MCAS was first introduced with a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth. And we've seen that here as well with PARC. No reason to believe this is going to be any different. But our students in Massachusetts have always risen to the challenge. Look at what has happened since '93 and today with student performance, and I feel confident that that's going to continue. But it's going to take advocacy on all of our parts to make it be what we want it to be. And this is how we'd like to close. Regardless of the transitions in standardized testing, we will continue to focus on standards and powerful learning experiences for all of our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you both.
That was a long presentation.
It was, but it was very informative, and it was,
We extended it.
Yeah, our apologies.
thanks a lot. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Otto, if you want to join the committee? I know you've been eagerly waiting.
Presented as an option, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we will move on to our subcommittee reports. Mr. Larson, our Finance and Budget Subcommittee Chair, is not here. I believe, if my recollection is correct, Mr. Storrs, you said you'd give the report from that meeting?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so the Finance and Budget Subcommittee met on January 20th in this room. First issue was the election of the chairperson, and unanimously we elected Mr. Larson to repeat as the chairperson of the Finance and Budget Subcommittee. As far as the monthly budget reports, and Mr. Furtado, please jump in wherever you need to. The report was that we're running at 50% of expended, and normally it'd be a little bit less than that at this point. There has been a communication sent to the mayor regarding the additional funding being requested for the teachers hired at Hyman Fine and Hill Roberts. The mayor has also asked Mr. Furtado to appear before the municipal council, I believe it's tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
And the subcommittee was informed that we've received the $60,000 for the CTE. The health insurance lines are running on budget, as I understand. And as far as the budget process right now, there's no numbers out from the state as of yet, unless it's changed since last week.
Friday afternoon.
Oh, would you like a report on that?
Yeah,
Briefly?
the governor has proposed a 1.7% increase in state aid to education, which would increase our Chapter 70 funding. If that were the percent, it ended up being the case, from $35.2 million to $35.4 million. Not very helpful, but those are the numbers.
It's better than going the other way, so.
Not ideal, but.
Okay, so the thought process is that the budget process that the governor is using will take longer, but at least it sounds like some action has been taken. And the subcommittee asked Mr. Furtado to speak with Mr. Lacasse to see how the city side wants to go forward as far as the budget process. There was some discussion regarding the wireless and how previously the city side had talked about helping us make that a reality. But in the end, as everybody is fully aware, we're doing it on our own. We unfortunately weren't able to get into the state funding at this time, so as everybody knows, we found ways during the last term to make this a reality, and we are going forward with that. But there was discussion about how if the city was going to help us with that at some point, you know, maybe a discussion could happen regarding that because now we're making it happen. So, so the subcommittee asked Mr. Furtado to reach out to Mr. Cass again to see if they're willing to help with the costs of the process to upgrade the Wi-Fi. There was a long discussion regarding the school lunch budget transfer from carryover. What this had to do is every year at the end of the school year we have to close out the budget, and one line item that seems to be a concern is the negative balances for school lunch accounts. So students who owe money. Mr. Furtado, could you expand a little bit on how much we're talking?
Sure. The current school lunch account balance, and what that means is a student would come to school on a given day and not have any money for lunch, and they would essentially charge their lunch. We have an electronic point of sale system that tracks that. Those outstanding balances as of the meeting were just north of $30,000. Of that $30,000, approximately 20 was specific to June 30th, 2015 and earlier. I can't pinpoint where earlier starts because there was no relief to the school lunch account prior. So we are obligated, because school lunch is a federal program, to make the school lunch account whole at the end of each fiscal year. So our obligation for FY15, now that the end of year funds were certified, is 20,000 and change.
So, you know, at the end of the school year last year, it was like 27,000, but 7,000 has been collected from those students who owed money, so it's about 20,000. Additional students have gone in the hole as well for this year, but that won't be a problem until July 1st or June 30th of this year. We have about 1,200 students who participate in the lunch program. There's a variety of reasons why they can go into the hole, but this is a bigger issue when we're talking 20, 30,000. It's already been discussed and referred down to the policy subcommittee.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I mean, this is really a multifaceted issue that, and I don't want to steal Mrs. Scales' thunder, but the policy considerations have to be taken into account going forward. Whereas the finance committee kind of discussed fixing the problem we have for the past fiscal year.
And I do want to say the reason it's coming to us at this point is, you know, a lot of stuff has been going on. This was brought to Mr. Rattata's attention by Whitson's. He wanted to, of course, look into the accuracy of everything. So that was part of the time process, and that's why it's coming forward at this point. So as Mr. Furtado had alluded, legally we have to close out that line. We're actually required by law to make it whole at the end of each year, and we can face a fine for noncompliance. In that regard, the subcommittee has made a motion that is coming forward, so there is a motion on the table to send to the full committee for approval to transfer $20,163.04 from carryover funds to the school lunch revolving account to close out the fiscal year 15. And it came forward in a 4-0 vote. So that motion is now on the table, and I'll put it to discussion. Yep, Mr. Bailey.
Mr. Furtado, would you guess that of the students that are, I don't want to say in default, but are beyond their balance, that are owing money, how many of them are, percentage-wise, how many are less than $1, less than $10, less than $20, less than $100? Like, I mean, I'm sure I know there are a handful that are.
There's significant. There's 1,200 students total making up the $20,000. There's probably 60 students who are above 100 out of the 1,200, and those 60 students probably total something in the teens. So they're a significant portion of the total.
The teens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. And then a whole bunch of people only $10 and $15. An important point that wasn't mentioned is the finance committee also required that we don't relieve the students of the obligation, that we meet the obligation of the school lunch program, but still conduct collection efforts against the students.
So anything that is collected would then go into carryover funds as
carryover
reimbursement.
funds, yes.
Thank you.
But I think it's also important to note that part of the discussion was, because it was 2015 funds, any funds that would be collected would not necessarily come to us.
We clarified that.
Okay.
So it would be put into carryover.
Oh, so we're okay with that. That's good. That was a concern of ours, and it sounds like it's been resolved, so that's a very good thing.
What does it do to our carryover account? That 20,000 reduction will leave us with?
About 100.
Okay.
Is there any other discussion regarding the motion that's on the table? All right, hearing none, I'll put it to a vote. So again, the motion is for approval to transfer $20,163.04 from carryover funds to the school lunch revolving account to close out fiscal year 15. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No abstentions? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Unanimously. Next, there was discussion regarding the Whitson's contract. Fiscal year 17 is going to be the 5th year of the school lunch contract. Mr. Furtado said that he would really like to get some feedback from the committee members, from the community, through the committee members, regarding Whitson's as our lunch provider, so that we can have further discussion in the coming weeks or month regarding the Whitson's contract and going forward. So I'll put that out to the members if they can reach out to their constituents regarding that. The 10-year contract with Bloom and the increases in years 6 through 10 are significant. We'll want to exercise our 1-year renewals with Bloom and Sodexo. We'll need to go out to bid on the transportation contract in January, February, about a year from now. And Mr. Furtado wanted very much to emphasize that Sodexo is an extremely invaluable partnership. You know, they've done a lot for us, and we want to continue at this time seeing that happen. Next, we had a discussion regarding user fees for school-based groups. Part of the problem that we were seeing is that the buildings themselves at times, this isn't all the time, but once in a while, a certain group who may have been doing something for years and are just used to doing it a certain way, it happens kind of through the school and not using the procedures that are in place per policy. So part of that discussion was brought up. And you know, there's many different activities, and custodial fees need to be charged when it's appropriate. There was discussion and concern from the subcommittee members regarding charging groups, school groups, specifically school groups, that you know, the whole purpose behind them is for the benefit of our students, the PTOs, the booster groups here at the high school. So there was discussion regarding that, and I think we came to you know, a conclusion that in some cases a charge is applicable if they are using the building in a way where a mess will be left and a custodial service is needed. There should be some sort of charge, but at the same time, the use of the buildings is almost always waived, and if there isn't going to be a custodial or to get into the building, there's nobody needed to do that, and maybe those situations don't happen all the time, but it's part of the discussion that needs to happen. Ultimately, this needs to go down to the policy subcommittee and to look at policy KFB-R, which is something that we had already started to discuss at the policy. Which again, I'm stealing Mrs. Scales' thunder. Sorry. And the next thing that we talked about is some of the capital improvements that's going on with municipal council at the municipal level. We have boiler and air conditioning issues throughout the district, fire suppression issues that need to be addressed, and in a recent fire inspection, there were some issues. If Mr. Patel, you could speak to that.
Sure. The fire department is paying close attention to the materials in the classrooms, and we're working with them to make sure we meet their expectations and trying to improve communication regarding taking questionable materials out of the classroom without real strong notice to the faculty and staff.
So, and then the last item on the agenda was regarding MSBA, and there was a proposal that was submitted to the MSBA, and we're looking to be getting feedback from MSBA within 5 business days.
We received that and are submitting the ad to the Central Register in the state of Massachusetts for OPM services tomorrow.
Is there any questions from the committee regarding MSBA or any of the items that were discussed at finance? Hearing that, Mr. Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Storrs. Moving on, Ms. Gales will give our Policy and Personnel Subcommittee meeting report.
Thank you. Mine will be much shorter. It's, we had our meeting on January 19th. The first item discussed were the changes made by DESE to the regulations governing the physical restraints of students that went into effect this month. The policy and exhibits as presented by the administration were properly vetted, and changes and additions were made to them. The subcommittee also recoded them to better align with the NSBA classification system. At this time, due to the sensitivity of this policy, I'm requesting from the chairman that the vote, when we vote on the motion to move to suspend the rules for tabling the items for 2 weeks before, in order for them to for the immediate implementation of the policy and its exhibits.
Yeah, so a brief explanation. There is some time sensitivity to getting these amendments to the physical restraint policies in place due to the change in committee, the meeting schedules, everything that happened in December of last year. We haven't been able to get to this. This is one of the reasons why we actually had policy meet as early as it did in this term. We really need to get this approved, assuming that the committee approves it as soon as possible. Our general practice is to table a policy approval till the next meeting, which won't be for another 2 weeks or so, and we really can't wait that long. So what I would be looking for is a motion to suspend the rules to enable the committee to vote to enact this policy change effective tonight.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? I'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mrs. Scales?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mrs. Sawyer?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you. Everybody's had a chance to look over the changes, the policies that were presented. Are there any discussions or questions or comments on them as presented? Okay. I'll begin with a motion to approve the amendments as presented to policy JLDBB, redesignated to policy JKAA as the physical restraint policy.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Motion to approve the amendments as presented to policy JLDBB-E1, redesignated to policy JKAA-E1, the physical restraint procedures.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the redesignation of policy JLDBB-E2, redesignated to policy JKAA-E2, the physical restraint grievance procedures.
So moved.
Second.
Just a side note that there actually aren't any changes made, we're just changing the recoding on that one. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the amendments as presented to policy JLDBB-E3, redesignated to policy JKAA-E3, the policy provision for physical restraint handbook provision.
So moved.
Second.
Comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the amendments as presented to policy JLDBB-E4, redesignated to policy JKEE-E4, physical restraint report form process.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the amendments as presented to policy JLDBB-E5, redesignated to policy JKAA-E5, Mass DESC, Student Staff Restraint Injury Report 603 CMR 46-06-7.
So moved.
Second.
Any comments? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And a motion to approve the removal of the current policy, JLDBB-E6, as recommended by our legal counsel.
So moved.
Second.
This is the physical restraint waiver form that is no longer being used.
Okay.
So, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. The second item that was to be discussed was the residency policy, but it was tabled for this time, waiting for some clarification from DESI. And lastly, we had a spirited discussion regarding the possible need for a new policy to deal with the very high past due amounts in the school lunch accounts. There was definite agreement from members and administration that changes need to take place because we cannot continue to have families carry such large past due amounts, some with the intent of never paying them off. The subcommittee and administration agreed to look into this further, and we will discuss this at a later time. And the next policy meeting is set for February 22nd, and that, Mr. Chairman, is my report.
Thank you, Mrs. Scales. That concludes our subcommittee reports for tonight. Next on the agenda is open forum. This is a time when members of the public may address the school committee. Open forum is not a time for committee members to engage in dialogue with members of the public. Guidelines for open forum are available to you. Please know that we are interested in what you have to say, but we cannot respond without background information on your issue. Please come forward to the podium and state your name and address if you'd like to address the school committee. That closes open forum. Then being no further business before the school committee, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.